She disappeared for a while and now she's back with a baby and thinks I'll take her back. My wife went on a trip and disappeared for years. Now she has returned with a baby in her arms and thinks I will accept her back. I always heard people say things like, I never saw it coming, and truthfully, that's exactly how it happened to me. My wife and I were together for 4 years before we got married, and I honestly thought we had a good thing going. And I mean, a really good thing. We had plans, a whole life mapped out, and for a very, very long time, I truly believed we were on the same page. Ever since we got married, we started talking seriously about having children. She always said she wanted 2 or 3, we even talked about names, how to decorate the baby's room. She would even spend hours looking at newborn clothes and items online. She seemed excited. It was a recurring theme in our conversations and it brought us closer. Everything seemed perfect until we received bad news. After months of trying without success, we decided to get some medical tests done, and that's when reality hit me. The problem was me. My count was too low, and the chances of us having children naturally were almost nil. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt completely useless. Everything we had planned crumbled in an instant. I fell into a bad place, emotionally speaking. I ended up going to therapy because I couldn't handle the idea of having failed my wife. It took me time, but eventually, I learned to cope with it. At first, she was very understanding. She told me it didn't matter, that we would be happy just the 2 of us. But there was something in her tone, in the way she said it. I don't know how to explain it, but it seemed like she was just saying those words because it was what she was supposed to say. She went from getting excited talking about baby names to completely avoiding any conversation about children. But it wasn't just that. Something in her attitude towards me changed. She became colder. She wasn't openly cruel, but she wasn't the same person anymore. Suddenly, she started making comments about my appearance, about how I should take better care of myself, exercise, be more productive around the house. And mind you, I was never a lazy guy or anything like that, but it seemed like she was looking for excuses to criticize me. When I confronted her about her change in attitude, she simply told me I was imagining things, that I was overreacting, that I had become too sensitive. In the end, I ended up believing her. I didn't want to seem insecure or needy, so I stopped pressing the issue. And so, a couple of years went by. Our relationship became mechanical. We were more like roommates than husband and wife. I tried to talk about other options, adoption, surrogacy, but every time I brought it up, she shut it down immediately. She said she didn't want to think about it, that she was happy just being with me. But in her eyes, in her tone, I never fully believed it. And then one day, out of the blue, she told me she wanted to go on a trip with her friends. It wasn't unusual for her to take trips with them, she had done it a couple of times before, and I always supported her. This time, she said they wanted to go to the United States for a few weeks. I didn't think much of it. I trusted her. I even helped her pack her suitcase and drove her to the airport. I remember clearly the last thing she said to me before she left. She looked at me and said, "Thank you for being so understanding." At the moment, it seemed odd, it wasn't like I had done anything special, but her tone was genuine, so I let it go. That night, I stayed up so I could call her when she landed, just to make sure everything was okay. Her flight was supposed to be about 9 hours, so I tried to keep myself busy watching TV, but I couldn't help but glance at the clock every few minutes, waiting for her message. When I saw that the flight had landed, I called her immediately. The phone rang several times, but no one answered. I thought maybe she was tired and had gone straight to the hotel to sleep. I didn't pay it much mind. But when morning came and I still hadn't heard from her, I started to feel a knot in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I tried calling her again. Nothing. I sent her a few messages, assuming maybe she was busy or her phone was on silent. But more hours passed, and I still had no response. That's when I really started to panic. I called her sister to see if she had heard anything from her. Nothing. Every minute that passed, my anxiety grew. I even went so far as to call her friends, the ones who were supposedly with her on the trip. Maybe her phone was off. Maybe something had happened and she just hadn't had time to let me know. But when I finally managed to get in touch with one of them, the answer I received left me cold. They weren't on a trip. None of them. In fact, they were in the city, just a few blocks from our house, having coffee. It was as if the floor had disappeared from under my feet. She wasn't on a girls' trip. She wasn't with her friends. She hadn't gone anywhere with them. She had simply left. I just sat there, phone in my hand, feeling my stomach sink. I couldn't understand it. Why would she lie to me like that? Why would she disappear without saying anything? I tried to convince myself that there must be some explanation. Maybe she missed a connecting flight, maybe there was an emergency, maybe she just couldn't call me. But deep down, I knew the truth. This hadn't been a mistake, this had been planned. The way she said, "Thank you for being so understanding," before she left, the coldness in her attitude over the last few years, how she had stopped talking about our future, the comments about my appearance, it all finally started to fit together. That night, I sat there staring at the phone, waiting for a message, a call, anything. But nothing came. And deep down, I knew. I wouldn't wake up the next morning to an explanation. There would be no apology. There was no emergency. She had simply gone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping it was all a dream. But when I woke up and saw her side of the bed empty, reality hit me with its full force. The first few days, I was in complete denial. I kept calling her, hoping to hear her voice, to get an answer, something to help me understand what had happened. I wanted anything, whatever it was. I left voicemails without even knowing what to say, but all I got in return was silence. And somehow, that silence felt worse than anything else. It was as if I no longer existed to her, as if she had decided I wasn't even worth an explanation. At first, her family was as shocked as I was. Her mother knew nothing of her plans and hadn't heard from her either. I ended up spending a lot of time at their house, searching for answers no one could give me. I think they felt sorry for me. Her mother would let me stay some nights, even making me food when I didn't even have the strength to do it myself. She would listen to me talk about everything that didn't make sense, about how my life had fallen apart overnight. Sometimes, she would just sit there in silence. I went from one extreme to the other, anger, sadness, guilt. I asked myself over and over again, what did I do wrong? Did I miss a sign? Did I not give her enough attention? But deep down, what tormented me most was a single question: where was she now? There were days I would replay every conversation, every argument, trying to understand what led her to leave. I became obsessed with finding the answer, as if that could fix everything. I barely ate, barely slept, and my work began to suffer. People started to notice. Coworkers, neighbors, even people I barely spoke to, they all asked if I was okay. I would just shrug and say I was dealing with some personal matters. I was ashamed to admit what had happened. Saying out loud that my wife had left me without a single word made me feel even more pathetic. Eventually, I told a few close friends. They did their best to distract me, taking me out for a drink, to play games, anything to help me move on. But even when I was with them, my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about why I hadn't been enough for her to stay. One of the worst parts of all this was the people who didn't know what had happened. Neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives who weren't in the loop. "How's married life?" or "How's your wife?" Every time someone asked, it felt like they were ripping off a freshly formed scab. I didn't have the courage to tell them the truth. I would just smile and say everything was fine, but that lie got heavier each time I repeated it. Therapy ended up being the only thing that truly helped. I had never gone before, but after months of barely functioning, a friend almost had to drag me there. He found a therapist, and I started going every week. Talking to someone neutral, someone who didn't know her or me, helped me release all the anger, the betrayal, the emptiness she had left behind. I spent entire sessions talking about the sleepless nights, how I would stay awake replaying every detail over and over, looking for the missing piece. And then the therapist told me something that, although I didn't want to accept it at the time, ended up being what I needed to hear most. She made the decision to leave. That's her responsibility, not yours. It was a hard pill to swallow. For so long, I thought I had done something wrong, that I had somehow pushed her away. But slowly, I began to see things differently. The truth was, she had been cold and distant for a long time, and I had simply ignored it, hoping things would get better on their own. I convinced myself that if I tried hard enough, I could keep our marriage afloat. But it didn't work that way. It wasn't until I started taking small steps to rebuild my life that I realized how much of myself I had lost in that relationship. I was always the one making the effort, the one making sure she was happy, that her life was comfortable. But now, with all this time on my hands, I didn't know what to do. So, I decided to reclaim the things I had let go of. I went back to some old hobbies, hit the gym, started reading the books I had been putting off. I even dared to try new recipes in the kitchen. At first, I was just going through the motions, but slowly, I started to feel more like myself again. My work improved too. For months, I had been running on autopilot, but now I started to really apply myself. I didn't have much else in my life at that point, so I focused on my career, and it paid off. Months later, I was offered a promotion, one I never would have gotten if I were still wallowing in self-pity. I'm not going to lie and say it was all easy. There were still days when it hurt. Sometimes I'd find something that reminded me of her, a photo, an old movie ticket, little things that brought back memories. Sometimes I wondered what she was doing, if she ever thought of me, if she ever regretted what she did. But over time, those moments became less frequent. I started reconnecting with friends I had barely spoken to since I got married. We started doing things together again. We went golfing, hiking, things I hadn't done in years. It felt good to be with people who weren't tied to that disaster, who helped me move forward without dragging me back into the pain. And looking back, I realized I had put too much of myself into that relationship. I existed only as her husband. When she left, I felt like I had lost a part of myself, as if she had left an impossible void to fill. But little by little, I was recovering. It wasn't easy, it wasn't fast, but I did it. By then, I had also legally put an end to everything. After so much time without hearing from her, I started the divorce process for abandonment. It wasn't complicated. An official attempt was made to notify her, but when there was no response, the judge approved it without needing her consent. I signed the papers, left it all behind, and with that, any tie that bound us was broken forever. That year, I could finally look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't defined by what she did to me. I was more than just the guy whose wife abandoned him. I had survived, I had rebuilt myself, and I had moved on. For the first time in years, I felt strong. I felt like I could truly live my life without her shadow haunting me. And honestly, I was proud of that. Life was finally starting to feel normal again. Or at least, as normal as it could be after that whole disaster. I had my routine, my friends kept me busy, work was going better than ever, and I stopped thinking about her. She was no longer a ghost in every corner of my life. And then, one Saturday morning, someone knocked on my door. When I opened it, I froze. It was her, standing on my doorstep, holding a baby. For a second, my brain stopped working. It was like seeing a ghost. She looked more or less the same, but a bit more worn down. And the worst part was, she genuinely seemed to think I'd be happy to see her. That hit me hard. I thought I was over any feelings for her, but seeing her there suddenly brought a lot of emotions back to the surface. I thought I had buried all that, but at that moment, I realized there were still traces of what she did to me. I didn't say anything at first, I just stood there, staring at her. She smiled, as if nothing had happened, and with all the calmness in the world, she asked me, "Can I come in?" After everything she did, she just showed up at my door as if I was supposed to welcome her with open arms. But I didn't. I stood my ground and told her no, that she could stay out there and explain what the hell she was doing, but she was not coming into my house. This was my space, the place I had rebuilt, and I was not going to bring all her chaos back into my life. She seemed surprised by my response, as if she really thought I would just let her in. But instead of leaving, she stood there and started to talk. I know this might be a big surprise, but I wanted to come back and explain everything. She had that look on her face, the one people use when they truly believe they have a chance. And in that moment, I had to decide. Part of me wanted to laugh in her face, another part just wanted to shut the door and forget about it all. But I was also curious. I wanted to know what excuse she had, what story she had concocted to justify what she did. So, I let her talk. She told me she had made a mistake by leaving, that over time she realized she had lost the best thing she ever had in her life. She said she had spent a lot of time reflecting and that after having this baby, she finally understood what really mattered in life. And then, pointing to the baby, she said, "This is our second chance." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did she think this baby was some kind of magic reset button, and we could just pick up where we left off? I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside, I was furious. She kept talking, saying we could be a family again, that she had made a terrible mistake but now we could start over, just the three of us. And then, I finally asked her the one question that had been eating at me since the moment she appeared. "Why did you leave?" I kept my voice steady, but inside, I felt rage burning. I had spent years trying to understand, torturing myself with all the possibilities, and now that she was here, I needed to hear it from her own mouth. She hesitated, looked at the ground. She seemed ashamed, but finally, she told me. She left me because she wanted a child, and since I couldn't give her one, she found someone else who could. She said it just like that, as if it were no big deal, as if it hadn't destroyed my life, as if I was supposed to just nod and accept it. As for the father, she implied that he abandoned her, but that she realized the person she wanted by her side in those moments was me. Just like that. It took me a minute to process what I had just heard. She abandoned me, went off with another man, had a child, and now she expected me to be okay with it, as if nothing that happened mattered. You left, you had a baby with another man, and now you think you can just come back and pretend nothing happened. She started to cry. She said she was sorry, that she had made a huge mistake, but I didn't care anymore. Too much time had passed. I wasn't going to let her do it again. But that didn't move me at all. She kept talking, telling me she had realized I was the only man she had ever truly loved, that we were meant to be together. Honestly, I had a hard time keeping a straight face. I couldn't believe how delusional she sounded. That wasn't love. That was desperation. I saw it on her face, in her eyes. Then, when she saw her words weren't having the effect she hoped for, she tried to change her strategy. She tried to make me feel guilty, talking about how hard it had been to be a single mother, how much she had suffered. Seriously, she tried to position herself as the victim in this whole story, as if her own decisions hadn't led her exactly where she was now. She told me she needed my support and that she was ready to make things work. As I listened to her, all I could think was, who the hell does she think I am? I stayed silent, letting her talk, but at that point, I was done listening. So, without beating around the bush, I told her directly, you made your decision a long time ago. Now you have to live with it. There is no second chance here. The expression on her face changed. She looked stunned, as if she had never considered the possibility of me saying no. As if she truly believed she could just show up at my door and walk back into my life whenever she felt like it. And then, just when I thought she had finally understood and would leave, her tone changed. Out of nowhere, she started screaming at me. She called me selfish, said I had an obligation to give her a chance to fix things. And the worst part was when, with all the nerve in the world, she mentioned the divorce. If I had wanted to, I could have taken half of everything you owned, she said. Even the house would be mine. And I didn't do it because I loved you. But we are a marriage, and you have a responsibility to me. That's when I laughed. I couldn't help it. No, I don't. Her expression changed in an instant. Of course, you do, she insisted, as if I were saying something absurd. We're still married. What's mine is still mine. No, it's not, I shot back, looking her straight in the eyes. Because we're already divorced. She went blank for a moment. She didn't react. It took her mind a second to process it, as if the idea had never even crossed her mind. And then her face transformed into horror. What did you say? She asked. That we're nothing anymore, I replied calmly. You left, you disappeared, you didn't answer my calls, you gave no explanation. So, I filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. You were notified, and you didn't respond. How could you do this to me? She screamed, as if I were the monster in this story. How could you throw away our marriage like that? I laughed again, but this time with disbelief. I wasn't the one who threw it away. You did that when you ran off with someone else and left me behind. She opened her mouth to keep yelling, but I had no interest in hearing it anymore. Your decisions are your responsibility, not mine. And with that, I slammed the door in her face. I could hear her muffled screams from the other side, but I didn't care anymore. She could pound, cry, scream all she wanted. I knew I would never let her back into my life. The woman I married, the one I once loved, no longer existed. And the one on the other side of that door was nothing more than a stranger who thought she could pick up the pieces whenever it suited her. I walked away from the door, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I thought that was it. I thought she would get the message and leave. But no. Instead, she started pounding on the door harder, screaming all sorts of things. The one place I had managed to rebuild after the disaster she left me in, and now she was out there, demanding I let her in. At first, I thought about ignoring her, letting her scream until she got tired. But then, curiosity got the better of me. So I opened the door just a crack, enough to show her I was listening but without letting her in. When she saw I wasn't reacting as she expected, she tried to change tactics again. She launched into a monologue about how she was willing to forgive me for slamming the door in her face. Yes, you heard that right. She said she was ready to start over, as if this were a simple couple's argument and not the result of years of lies and abandonment. She started talking about how we could make things work if we both put in the effort. That's when I couldn't hold it in anymore. I laughed. I really laughed at the sheer audacity of this woman. Her face turned red with fury when I did, as if I were the one in the wrong for not taking her seriously. Then I told her, you made your choice. You had your chance, and you threw it in the trash. I'm not going to pretend none of this happened just because it's convenient for you now. And that's when the mask completely fell off. She stopped pretending to be sorry. She started attacking me, saying that I didn't understand how hard it had been for her, that after she left, she had felt lost, that she had realized too late she'd made a mistake. But I didn't believe a word of it anymore. So I told her straight up, leaving was a choice. You planned it, you lied to me, and you did it. Now you're here thinking your regret means something, but it means nothing. That made her explode. She dropped the sad, repentant woman act and started insulting me. She said I was unfair for not giving her another chance. Her face was a mixture of anger and something else, maybe desperation, maybe guilt. But honestly, at that point, I no longer cared. She started pacing back and forth on my porch, ranting about how I would never find someone like her and how I would regret not giving her another chance. She seriously tried to make me feel like I was the one losing something by not taking her back. When she saw I wasn't going to budge, she raised her voice even more. She said I had forced her to leave, that if I had been more understanding about the children issue, none of this would have happened. According to her logic, the fact that I couldn't give her a child meant I had failed her as a husband, and that somehow justified her leaving to have a baby with someone else. Her mental gymnastics were impressive. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to try and blame me for her own decisions. So I made it clear to her. If you wanted a child so badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while you were planning your exit. She went quiet, looking at me as if I had slapped her. But I didn't give her time to respond. That was your decision, completely yours. And now you have to live with it. She was silent for a second, but then she tried one last angle, pity. She asked me to think about the child, that it wasn't fair for me to turn my back on him. She was holding him in her arms, really using him to try and make me feel guilty. But I didn't fall for the trap. I don't know who this child is. I have nothing to do with him. And at that moment, I saw it in her face. The realization finally hit her. She knew I wasn't going to change my mind. She knew there was no way I would let her back into my life. I could see the anger fading, replaced by something else, maybe true regret, maybe just frustration. But I didn't care. To me, she was nothing more than a stranger. She stood there for a few more seconds, as if still hoping I would call her back. But I said nothing. I just stared at her until she finally understood that I was serious. And then, without another word, I closed the door. I walked away from the door feeling relieved, as if I had finally won. She had spent so much time believing she could manipulate me back into her life, but it was over. I was free. There wasn't going to be a second chance, not for her. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. And the strangest thing was, I didn't feel angry, or sad, or even surprised. It was as if all the energy I had wasted on her for years, the regret, the guilt, the obsession with finding answers had simply vanished. I finally had the closure I didn't know I needed. But of course, things didn't end as cleanly as I had hoped. A few days later, I received a text message from her mother. She apologized, saying she was ashamed of the way her daughter had handled everything and that she had tried to make her see reason, but obviously, it hadn't worked. Her mother was a good person, she helped me a lot when her daughter left, and I knew she was genuinely upset about all of this. I didn't hold a grudge against her, but I also didn't want to be tied back to that mess. So I just replied with a simple, "Thank you for your concern," and left it at that. I didn't give her details, I didn't try to explain my decision, and she understood enough to know that this was really over. In the following week, I didn't hear from her daughter again. Finally, everything was behind me. Over time, I started to hear bits and pieces about her through mutual friends and social media. Apparently, she had moved back in with her parents, and things weren't going well for her. The guy she left me for, the baby's father, was never really involved. He had completely washed his hands of the situation, and now she was alone, dealing with the consequences of her decisions. By that point, she had burned too many bridges. She didn't have many people willing to lend her a hand. Her old friends, the ones who took her side when she disappeared, had already moved on with their lives. No one was eager to be dragged back into her drama. Even her parents, although they took her back, were not exactly in a position to support her and a baby. I knew this because shortly after receiving the message from her mother, I got a call from her father. He was polite but direct. He told me things were difficult and dropped the hint that maybe I could help a little. "We know you cared for her once," he said, "and with the baby, things have been complicated." I listened in silence, but when he started talking about how his daughter just needed a little support to get back on her feet, I let out a small laugh. Not out loud, but he got it. I responded with all the calm in the world, "Your daughter's decisions were her own. I'm not in a position, nor do I have any intention, of helping." I think he got the message because he didn't press further. After that, some of her friends tried to contact me, people I hadn't heard from in years started popping up. Some tried to play the guilt card. She's going through a hard time, they'd say. Maybe you could find it in your heart to give her another chance. There was even one friend of hers who had the nerve to tell me that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my bitterness get in the way of helping. I ignored them. After years of feeling like I was never enough, I had finally chosen to prioritize myself. I gave that woman everything I had, and she threw it in the trash. The least she could do was accept the consequences of her actions instead of expecting me to rescue her. Over time, the calls and messages dwindled until they finally stopped completely. It was as if everyone finally understood that I was serious. And that's when true peace came into my life. Everything started to feel normal again. It wasn't a luxurious or exciting life, but it was mine. I had rebuilt it with my own two hands, on my own terms. The freedom was refreshing. I didn't need anyone's permission to live how I wanted. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about someone else's happiness. The last I heard of her, she was still drifting from one place to another, bouncing from one job to another, staying at friends' houses until they got tired of her. Apparently, she had started asking for help from anyone who would listen. They even hinted that she was still hoping I would change my mind, that maybe one day I would agree to be the father to her child. But that was never going to happen. For the first time since the day she left, I truly felt at peace. It wasn't an exaggerated happiness or a great moment of revenge, just tranquility. And you know what? That's enough.